Welcome everyone to the May Lunch and Learn today. I'm Kurt. I'm the risk engineer for cargo, but today I'm playing host for the Lunch and Learn session. Adam unfortunately can't be with us today, but never fear, we'll persevere without him. But for those of you that do have his email address, please send him an email and tell him how disappointed that you are that he isn't here today. For those of you that will be, or most of you should be aware, the Lunch and Learn topic today is maintenance more than just oil and filters. Just letting you know that we're recording this session, so the links to the session can be used and will be sent out in the coming days. Our presenter today is Hayden Reid. He's our plant and equipment risk engineer over here at NTI. Prior to NTI, he had 10 years experience in industry in the likes of engineering, asset management, maintenance across mining and the civil sectors. So he's been an engineer on super yachts as well. So I'm not sure if you've dropped in a juicy celebrity goss story, mate, but I'm sure that there's plenty in that head from your time below deck. So as I said before we kicked it off, I just want to say, add your questions, add your comments in the sections. We really, really value the engagement side of this and to be interactive. So put it in there. We'll do our best to answer it. And you're not here to listen to me today. You're here to listen to Hayden. So I'll hand it over all you, mate.
So when I say maintenance, what is it that you think of? Feel free to throw some answers in the chat box there. Is it car maintenance, lawn maintenance, hair maintenance? If you're from the US, it may well be child support. But got some interesting answers coming through there. Analysis of our large losses reveal that 22% of them are the result of missed maintenance opportunities. So evidently something so normal in our day-to-day lives, there's a bit of a disconnect with what's happening out there in industry. So let me ask another question. How confident are you that the people who are working on your assets know exactly what you're trying to achieve from them? Because I think that's probably the key question that I'd like answered today by all people, to just take that question away with you and really ponder it, and hopefully the things that we go over today will help you take action on that. So thank you very much for your time today. As Kurt mentioned, we're here today to talk about maintenance more than just oil and filters. And from me, it's really exciting to be able to talk about that. It's two things that I'm heavily involved with: maintenance and mobile plant and equipment. This is a bit of slightly new to the Lunch and Learn agenda. But I do want to raise that it is applicable across the board, whether we're talking transport, logistics, marine, even facilities maintenance. So just get this up. One thing that I really do want to call out is that this is actually a coming together of our sustainability strategy using data and insights. So early on, we'll touch on some of our data. So looking at some of our claims data that's been analysed to understand what's driving claims. And then further, we go into some of the industry insights. So it's taking that data to industry to try and understand what's happening out there and why we're seeing what we're seeing. And then following that, we go through some concepts and tactics that you can deploy within your day-to-day to make sure your maintenance program's top notch. One thing I do want to call out is that across NTI and Yellow Cover, we are across many industries, occupations, and geographically spread across the country. So that really does give us a unique perspective on what best practice is. One other thing I do want to call out from this this claims analysis is that we understand that there's a lot more loss that's experienced by customers than what we actually cover. There's loss of productivity, so that can be either from machines down or investigations. That can be either from customers, insurers, or regulators. There's potential injuries that have to be looked after. And there's other things, reputational damage, staff morale, things like that. It can go on and on. So I think it is worthwhile calling that out, that we do know that these losses go beyond what we cover. So that's why it's in everyone's best interest to try and mitigate the likelihood of these events occurring, as well as the severity. So, looking at this claims analysis. So what we looked at was large loss reviews. So we're looking at mobile plant and equipment claims over $50,000. This was in a 12-month period, hundreds of claims, looking at our whole motor portfolio, over 25,000 customers, and there's obviously multi-million dollars worth of damage being done. Similar to the well-known Natasi report, we try and look at all the available facts. So things like witness statements, photos, engineers or forensic reports, maintenance records, things like that. And it's obviously quite a laborious task and took quite an amount of time and effort. So what we're looking at there is to try and identify the proximate cause. So as we can see there, there's a few bits of equipment that have had some peril.
Are they? Sorry to jump in. I'm just curious. Are they bushfire photos? Like, is that from bushfires and that sort of side of things, or?
These examples here, obviously there's a couple of those rollovers there, but also those two burnt out machines are actually what we're here to talk about, missed maintenance opportunities. So one of them is a rubbed cable, and the other one's a ruptured hose that actually ignited.
Okay.
So looking at some of our drivers of the mobile plant and equipment large loss, you see there 40% human error. So obviously the mitigation strategies we recommend there are things like policies, procedures, training, but overarching all of that's culture, because all the policies and procedures in the world, if they're not executed well and lived and breathed by the workforce, don't reap the best rewards. And the next one there is 24% natural peril. So in this year of analysis, obviously we had the bushfires in 2020, so that's played a significant part in this year. We don't think that that's normal, 24%, but it was quite telling in that year. And the next one there, 22%, is obviously what we're here to talk about today, missed maintenance opportunities. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it was maintenance malpractice, or that we're not naive and think that 100% of these items could have been caught prior, but it just does highlight the significant portion of events that we believe could be caught earlier. So looking at missed maintenance opportunities, so we're looking, this is that hydraulic 10% is looking at the entirety of claims, not just missed maintenance opportunities. So what we see there is 10% of all claims are the result of some kind of hydraulic failure. So hoses are the most common, and they usually require some kind of ignition source. So whether it's a heat source, turbo exhaust, or electrical sparks, usually from motors or alternators. And it's obvious that hoses in and around these high risk areas should be of concern. So things that we should be looking for are the key failure modes of cracking, chafing or rubbing, and blistering. And similarly, when fitting new hoses, you need to make sure that they are the exact same, things like length and routing, making sure there's no twisting, excessive bends and things like that. And the next one that we see there is 9% are a result of electrical failures. So usually these are unfused high capacity cables, so things that go to your starter motors, alternators, depending on the wiring, sometimes the battery isolators. And what we tend to find there is there's a short circuit, which results in sparks and heat, which usually ignites the insulation or conduit, and then it spreads to other combustibles on the machine. So what we do know is fire spread quite quick on mobile plant and equipment, so you'd really only have a short window to act on them. And one thing to call out with electrical is that any additions to OEM wiring need to be thoroughly planned and really thought out to try and mitigate risk in the install. The third main area there, it's a significantly smaller number, but still worth discussing, is debris. So we usually see this in the form of buildup of hydrocarbons, so things like grease, oil, fuel. or organic matter. So you've got leaf litter, coal, chaff, things like that. So housekeeping is critical in these certain environments, but it should also be commonplace regardless. Neat and tidy equipment is, much easier to maintain. It's easier to highlight issues and rectify them in a effective manner. They also portray your business to the public. So if you've got neat and tidy equipment, obviously the general public sees that that's the way you undertake your business. And also if you've got other operators operating your equipment, psychologically, operators do treat a piece of equipment much better when it's in a well-maintained and clean condition. And just at the bottom there, it's interesting to call out that 98% of these mismaintenance opportunities result in equipment fire and usually total loss of the asset. It is believed that that's why the claim is made, so that's why we as the insurer find out about it. But one thing that I thought that should really raise, and I think hopefully should resonate with a lot of the audience, is that the question is how many events of electrical failure, hydraulic hoses, and just other breakdowns occur prior to the one that sets the machine alight. And I think that's quite interesting and highlights a pretty big opportunity for improvement.
So is that like essentially, for lack of a better word, are they triggers that should be looked at more in depth? Like if you get a failure that doesn't result in fire, should that then trigger more thorough checking and servicing?
Yes, I believe so. It really depends on what the occurrence was for that failure. But if you are having regularly having blown hoses or hydraulic leaks, again, electrical failures, you should really be trying to identify what's driving that. Is that part of your strategy? You're not trying to identify these faults, or is it something that you've introduced to the machine recently, or is the checks that you have in your servicing or maintenance strategy, are they not being affected correctly? Like, is your workforce not trained to identify what they're looking for, and things like that? So they're definitely the right questions to be asking and trying to get to the root cause of why you're seeing these issues, for sure.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So now we might jump into a poll. So if you just want to pop a number in the chat box, either 1, 2, 3, or 4. So the questions on the left there, describe your current approach to maintenance. So number 1 there. 2, I won't read them out. Give me a break.
I'll throw in a quick apology here. Our polls didn't work in Zoom this afternoon. So we had everything set up yesterday, but it didn't work today. So thank you, technology. But throw it in the chat box because we do want to find out what is happening across your sector as well.
And while that's taking place, I might just move on into the next area, which is industry insights. Once we had those findings of what we see in our claims analysis, what we wanted to do was go out to customers, industry groups and associations, and try and see what the feedback was and why we're seeing this. We are very lucky to be able to go to a lot of these industry events and obviously in day-to-day life talk to customers. So it really does give us some valuable insight into the occurrence of these events. So the first one I'd like to call out is first and foremost that our customers are really experts in their chosen field. Whilst they may have a mechanical aptitude or grew up around, family members or things, around a business where maintenance was being undertaken, they understand mechanical principles, things like that. They're not necessarily maintenance tradespeople or professionals in that field. I'd go further and say that, as we are aware, all of pieces of equipment have advanced substantially over the last, couple of decades. So have their maintenance requirements along with that. So again, they're experts in their field. They know exactly which piece of equipment to use and when, but not necessarily how to maintain it, and how to keep it in its best working order. So in that space, they usually rely on specialists. So that can be internal or external technicians or mechanics or fitters or whatever it may be. They really just lean on those specialists to execute the maintenance of their assets. And that really is an interesting area for me. And one of the questions I always ask, again, is how confident are they that the people who are undertaking the maintenance know exactly what they're trying to achieve from that asset? So the responses I get to that are quite mixed, to be honest. And that's pretty insightful, because how do we expect the people to execute a strategy if they're not aware of it? I think we've all kind of got from a trade background, we've all kind of got horror stories of things that we've been told to do by a customer that go against the principles of your trade or your craft. So that is something that we, I think, tradesmen are very in tune to. And sometimes, if they were to identify some issues in a service, or try and be a little bit proactive, sometimes there's a bit of a misconception that they may be trying to, extract more money from the customer, or just create more work for themselves. So what we seem to, what I can extrapolate from that is that people may just do the bare minimum, and that's where we get to this oil and filters scenario. The next one there is that maintenance is sometimes considered complex and expensive. So as we know, in almost in every business scenario, if something's considered complex and expensive, in competing priorities, it's going to be put on the back burner and not really focused on. Again, I think that's a bit of a misunderstanding. You don't really need to have the most expensive system, and it doesn't have to be a complex undertaking. You will, however, need some specialists in the room who understand your assets, and you'll really need to define what you're trying to achieve. And then it can actually be quite a cost-effective process. I suppose the key argument there is that actually undertaking maintenance done well is far cheaper than maintenance that's not done well. There's been many studies around the world trying to get to the bottom of it, but generally you're looking maintenance that's done in a reactive manner, as opposed to proactive, usually costs anywhere from 4 to 15 times the cost of doing it in a proactive manner. Again, you're looking at resultant damage and lost opportunity, and unplanned downtime are the key drivers of that cost. And the last one there is lack of support. I think that is really a component of those three prior points, as well as being one in its own right. So in discussions we have with the general public, it's really about knowing where to start and what to do. The reality is that I think we have to acknowledge where we're at currently, and generally speaking, that the existing processes in place are right, the hours and the date on the oil filter, whilst that's a system that's been around, it's effective. It's been around for 50 years. It still works. I suppose it poses the question of how many other systems that have been around for 50 years are still relevant these days. So I think it is another big opportunity to improve there. So I think the question that everybody wanted answered here.
Before you jump into that, just because I'm pushy, we got some good answers back with the poll. So it's pretty well split down the middle between 2s and 3s. So you're on the manufacturer's service schedule, or you're improving on it. So I guess the question I want to ask is, what does that say to you in your experience about what's happening out there in the industry now?
I would say that's pretty much the norm. which is good to see. Obviously, those threes are a good indication of people who are engaged and being proactive. Obviously, the manufacturers or OEMs schedules are, following that is, not best practice, but it's level with it. What I would highlight to people is that you can kind of, within reason and with the support of specialists, kind of use that OEM schedule as a bit of a baseline. And obviously, you need to take into account the application of your equipment and what you're trying to achieve out of it. And some of those things in there, you can kind of move either way to try and optimize your equipment. It does take a little bit of effort, but it doesn't have to be too complex. And that's how you really, if everyone's aiming for best practice, get to number 4 and start to really understand what your business is trying to achieve from those assets, and then put the plan in place to get there.
Okay. Well, I've got a question for you then. What's the silver bullet?
Unfortunately, there is none. Whilst we all want silver bullets and set and forget, maintenance, like many other areas of your business, that doesn't exist. It is a dynamic process, and it's something that has to, account for a pretty large degree of variation. So take, for example, the current supply availability of both equipment as a whole and parts for them. So the lead times and increasing costs that we're seeing now really mean that any reactive maintenance that you do is going to cost you time and money. And similarly, at the moment, we're seeing very buoyant values of second-hand plant and equipment. So some of the feedback that we're getting from some quite progressive and switched-on operators is they're placing orders now, and they're starting to ready their machines for sale when those new assets get here in the next 6 months. And so what I'd call out there is your asset management plan or strategy really has to respond to the changing market, and to take advantage when you can. Sorry. So in saying that, it's not super complicated, and I believe it is something that all our customers and the broader public can implement. So the first one that I think, like most things that you're understanding, is to really understand the fundamentals. So the fundamentals of maintenance, there are obviously far more than this, but for the purpose of today, I think the ones that are particularly relevant and key to understand are your costs and your tactics. So looking there, total cost of ownership, it probably sounds quite, it probably makes sense in itself, but it's pretty much all everything that you'll spend on that asset from when you buy it to when you dispose of it. So you've got your fixed components of that, which are things like finance and insurance. So for all, they're essentially monthly costs or whatever they may be. They're the same over the life of the asset. And then you've also got your variable costs, which are things like your servicing and repairs. So obviously, depending on how much you use the piece of equipment, and also what decisions you make in the maintenance, those are the variable costs, and they're the ones that you really, really want to take control of if you can. The thing about maintenance is the only choice you have is how much you want to try and control those variable costs. At the end of the day, you'll either have to do it because the machine will break down, or you can actually choose to do it earlier from being more proactive, if that makes sense. And then, so I do understand total cost of ownership is actually quite difficult to model and work out. You need a lot of data and a fair bit of expertise to do so. So I'm not proposing that people out there can do so, but it is a really good concept to understand, because from that, what you want to do is look at your cost per hour. So, pardon me, sorry. So with plant and equipment, most of your costs are going to be in a cost per hour format. In transport, you're usually looking at cost per kilometre. What is worth calling out about that is it's not, you're not looking at a snapshot in time. You should really be doing that over the life of the asset. So you're not doing it over a 6-month period, but you should be doing it over the total life cycle of that asset. Because trying to reduce, obviously it makes perfect sense, but trying to reduce your cost per kilometre or your cost per hour over a 6-month period, you're probably going to blow out your next 6 months. But so what you really are trying to achieve is the lowest cost per hour over the life cycle of that piece of equipment. Some of the feedback from customers that I get is this is a huge mind shift when they start to think of costs in this way. Obviously, what we see is the mindset that costs are not realised on an as incurred basis. So I paid the invoice this month, but obviously understanding how many hours that piece of equipment did that month, and just trying to slightly adjust your mindset around that. That's when you start to think in those ways. That's a real sign of asset management coming into play. So looking there at some of the tactics. So PM, preventative maintenance, it's basically planned activities. So these are usually done either by utilisation or calendar time. An easy example there is think of your car, 10,000 kilometres or 6 months. Obviously, mobile plant equipment uses hours. It can also be done for components and things like that, where you essentially setting a schedule that we do them at this point in time. The next one there is run to fail. Exactly as it sounds, you're waiting until an item fails to replace it. Whilst it may sound like I don't think this is a good strategy, it is actually a very valid strategy for non-critical components. And then the key is, they're non-critical and they won't cause further damage when they fail. So things that you to think about is they're usually used for components that are difficult to identify when they fail. Like it's not a wearing component as such. So usually electrical componentry, switches, ECMs and things like that are a good option there. Condition monitoring. This to me is probably one of the most important tactics and something that everybody should really have as part of their maintenance strategy. It's basically observations like you have in healthcare. They're used to identify any trends or changes and then take action. They really do give you prior warning of the jobs that are on the horizon for you. And then there's a huge amount of examples of they can just be normal measurements of wearing parts, which could be brake pads, pins and bush, or bearing deflection. And there's a huge array of other condition monitoring practices out there: oil sampling, vibration analysis, thermography, and even just visual inspections. When you're starting to see hoses cracking, that's a good opportunity to intervene. The last one there is predictive maintenance. This one is quite advanced and it really does rely on a lot of data. So you mainly see large operations and OEMs starting to use this in conjunction with condition monitoring, just to identify the best time to change components. With the prevalence of the Internet of Things and Industry 4.0, this will become more prevalent in the coming years.
So I'll give you 2 seconds to have a drink because I want to ask you a question. So out of those 4 tactics, which one is the most common currently?
So what I should say is any maintenance strategy should be a combination of these. You always want to be doing your preventative maintenance, at a scheduled point, whether that be, 250-hour, 500-hour services, whatever that may be. But part of that service should be condition monitoring. Part of it, it could be run to fail. Predictive maintenance, as I say, is quite complex, but we are seeing, as I said, OEMs really try and leverage this. So they're trying to catch as much data as they can. And then so they're trying to use that data that they're capturing to try and identify it to customers when the optimum time is to change a component or part. So as I say, not so commonplace now, but we will see this float through the industries. So the next step is to really focus on critical risks. So just ask the basic questions of what do you rely on. So looking at assets that are critical to your operation, is it maybe in a transport or logistics space? If you lose your forklift, your truck's not getting loaded, or similarly in a civil environment or mining environment, an excavator goes down, that means a whole fleet of trucks sitting idle. Or it could be, you need this pump running 24 hours a day for the next 5 days. So things like that are critical to your operation. Similarly, if there's something that contributes to the health and safety of your personnel, for an example could be, an air conditioner on a crib hut or smoko room. You may deem that as critical, and you want to put a bit of focus on that to try and mitigate the risks of mitigate the chance of things going wrong. And then you want to look at your high risk items. So those things that we highlighted earlier, from what we're seeing in our data, I would classify as high risk. So again, hydraulic hoses and pipes, electrical cables, and just looking at overall the cleanliness of your equipment. And one thing that I would even raise there, and I've recommended this to a number of customers, is to consider having a critical risk audit. You can do this, whether you want to do it 6 monthly, yearly, quarterly, whatever you like, and you just kind of focus on a certain critical risk. So in this instance, this quarter, you may be looking at hydraulic hoses. It's not saying that you don't want to focus on them when you're doing your everyday PM tasks, but it's just saying, this month, every service we do, we want to have a pretty good proper look at the hydraulic hoses. Similarly, depending on your equipment, if you're in agriculture and you're going into harvest, I'd strongly recommend prior to harvest commencing, you have a pretty thorough look over your equipment and make sure that it's in good working order, and you're pretty confident that you're going to get, your 2 or 3 months of continuous use out of it. It really will pay dividends for anything that you highlight, if it doesn't break in the field. And lastly here, it really is about setting your expectations of your maintenance providers. Sorry.
Keep going, mate. I like it.
I think we might lose the voice soon. So part of setting your expectations is obviously you need to decide them. So you can do this for all your fleet or item by item. Again, using that example, do you need that pump, running 24 hours a day, 5 days, for the next 5 days, or are you running this piece of equipment down until you are going to look at divesting from it? So you really want to define, the availability and life cycle that you're trying to achieve. Again, if it's say, you've got a fleet of trucks or whatever you have, you can do it across the fleet. It doesn't have to be asset by asset. And again, it's using those asset management principles of cost per hour as well can form part of that strategy. And the next step there is, once you've really defined that, is to set your expectations with the maintenance providers. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of tradesmen have actually got like an inner craftsman, and they want to try and achieve things. So if you set the expectation, it's kind of like setting a challenge for them to achieve. So if you can clearly define what you're trying to achieve from an asset, a lot of tradesmen will try and implement what they think is reasonable and practical to achieve that. So I would use that to your advantage, and really try and get them on the journey and see what you can achieve from that. One example that kind of, I suppose, goes in line with that is looking at a rubbed hose, for example. A lot of times, just installing a cable tie, which might cost only 1 cent, obviously could prevent a huge loss occurring, but it actually extends the life of the hose. So, having an engaged workforce working towards the goals that you've set out can actually really impact your operation. The next step there is, deciding on the items of what you're going to check and when. So what I'd highlight there is just to take a tiered approach. You want to do less in-depth inspections more regularly. So think maintenance pre-starts as a daily check. And then you're looking at things, obviously your scheduled services, 250, 500, 1,000 hour, things like that. Obviously, they're a tiered approach. So as you go on, there are more in-depth checks by more qualified people. And I'd just probably like to highlight that with your pre-start inspections, having educated and empowered operators really is a key there. You can really, the operator of the equipment are usually very good at identifying when something's going wrong. And they really give some really good guidance to the maintenance technicians. From experience, they're generally not the best at identifying or diagnosing the failure, but as I say, in conjunction with maintenance personnel, they usually are almost priceless in identifying faults prior to any other symptoms being shown, or even for maintenance providers to identify them. So for me, that pretty much concludes the webinar. One thing I do want to call out is we've recently launched the Better Business Hub. So this is a website that has a huge amount of resources, and it is constantly being updated and changed. There's a lot of maintenance and related articles that go through this in more detail up there now. You can also go on there and if you want, reach out to myself. There's a contact the experts page. So yeah, whether you want to reach out to Kurt, myself, Adam, Marty, whoever, that's an option up there. Cool. So thank you very much for that. Sorry, my voice is...
I love your dedication. You've pushed through this. It's fantastic. We do have a few questions. Have you got it in you to answer a few?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. So the first one I've got here does the quality of the lubricant used in servicing make a difference in reliability and equipment lifespan?
The short answer is yes, it does. The long answer is it actually, again, takes a lot of data and analysis of that data to prove. I definitely, there's something that I've done in a previous life. Gone back over years and years of data and different same pieces of equipment. That's the thing. Like in any analysis, you really need to compare apples with apples. And in this instance, it was a client we worked with changed from one supplier to another of lubricants, and it was predominantly grease that we started to see issues in pins and bushes and things like that. So obviously that was a quality issue of that supplier. But the one thing I'd call out there is the question, I think, was the quality, not the cost. I think, like in anything, you can't just necessarily, pardon me, equate quality with cost. They're two separate things. So definitely the quality of lubricants used is important, but I wouldn't just rely on the cost of the lubricant as equating to the quality, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. The next one I actually got a couple of times in different wordings, but I'll use the one that's the simplest for me to read it out to you. Are genuine OEM parts worth the money across the life cycle of equipment?
That's a great question. Again, interestingly, it's something I have done a fair bit of analysis into in a past life. I'll say, obviously, I'm not trying to be diplomatic, but again, there's so many variables that really impact it. One thing to call out is that, in that question, obviously, even just defining, you need to define this OEM versus this aftermarket solution, and ensure everything is like for like. It's very hard to do that. I would say overall, and also then the follow-up query is how you utilizing that equipment and trying to maintain it. Like, it again goes back to what you're trying to achieve out of it. All I can say is it really is a mixed bag. What I did in a previous life was identify certain components or things that supplied from an OEM are worth it over the life cycle. Some items were not. And again, maybe this is for larger operators, but what we were able to do from that analysis was go back to the OEMs and say, based on the pricing that you've provided on this item, we've done some research and found that it's not cost effective for us to utilize this. We're going to go this alternate route. What are your thoughts? And usually they'll sharpen their pencil pretty quick and drop the rate on it is the real answer. So I do believe that they definitely do have a place in your day-to-day operation, but I suppose that part of it is understanding that you need to have a lot of data and understanding to make that decision, and for most people it's not practicable.
Okay. The next one is, what environmental factors need to be considered when planning service schedules, and will they make a difference, i.e. salt, dust, heat, cold?
Yes, 100%. All of those ones. Altitude plays a part. In certain operations, the material being used, the material being moved. Again, coming from a mining background, is whether you're in a hard rock mine, metalliferous, versus a coal mine where it's a lot more, there's a much higher silica content. The wear on things like of your excavators and dozer undercarriage is significantly different across different terrains, as well as the wear in the bodies of the trucks. Again, the OEM schedule or the manufacturer's service schedule is a baseline that is kind of in a generic environment. But obviously, if you're working in a if you're in a coastal environment, or in a saline swamp versus being up on the top of a mountain or working in Central Australia, it's going to have different impacts to different parts of your equipment. Obviously, a dusty environment, you should be doing air filters more often. And again, if you're in a saline swamp, you're probably going to be wearing your undercarriage and things like that much quicker. So they all do form part of your maintenance strategy and then what you should be doing. And I suppose this and if there's any other questions, speak to specialists. As I say, a lot of the OEMs or dealers will help you out. By all means, reach out to us, and when we can kind of talk through, because there is so much variability in it, unfortunately.
That probably leads into the next one. We've got two left. Hopefully, you've got two answers left in your voice. One of them is: are there any options for the SME or smaller operators to be able to utilize predictive or preventative maintenance? Because you noted larger operators tend to have this software in-house.
Yes. One thing I suppose I kind of mentioned it early on. I hope it answers the question. For an SME operator to really try and, they don't have usually a large fleet of equipment, and it's, to be able to capture this data, they don't have the back end to be able to, again, capture and analyze the data. So in the realm of predictive maintenance, they don't really have, a lot of opportunity for that. But as I mentioned, a lot of the OEMs are starting to really deck out new machines with a lot of sensors, and a lot of those sensors are feeding back to the OEM's, cloud-based systems, which, again, they're aggregating that data and trying to identify what some of the telltale signs are that maintenance is required. So there's some of I know so there's some quite medium-sized construction equipment that's now fitted with I think it's a 4-in-1 engine oil sensor, which is essentially monitoring pressure, viscosity, temperature, and clarity of the oil. So it's not as in-depth as a normal oil analysis, but to be monitoring the machine 24/7, it can highlight when you've had if you've got fuel dilution in the oil, or pressure spikes, or it's starting to get a bit too much soot in it. It'll flag that, even though you might not be due on hours, or you may, it's probably more of a variable servicing model. It'll tell you the opportune time to service that engine compartment, which, again, it's probably a new way of thinking, and you're moving more away from the defined 250-hour service, but we're starting to get there with connected sensors, and as I say, it's a 4-in-1 sensor that's measuring a number of things at once. So it's an interesting space.
Well, the last one that I've got, and I think this might be a curly one for you, so I'm really excited to listen to you answer this one. What if I have a boss that just sees maintenance as a cost and is looking to minimize expenses wherever possible?
I suppose that is a curly one. But the beauty of it is your boss is probably pretty switched on in the sense that they're trying to run as efficient operation as they can. Probably try and use that to your advantage. I'm trying to think. Probably an easy equation. I think I mentioned earlier, or maybe I didn't, about a civil contractor in the metro area around Sydney. I was talking to him a couple of months ago about his most common breakdown, and he said it's blown hoses. And I said, so when this occurs, how often? So what do you do to fix it? And the answer was, it depends on what the hose man's doing. Either I'll give him a ring and he'll pop around, or if he's going to be a few hours away, I'll remove the hose, go to the shop, get it made, come back and fit it myself. I said, so obviously there's variability in it, but what are you looking from hose blown to back to work? How long is that usually taking you? He said, 4 to 5 hours. So obviously if you're looking at lost productivity, and obviously just the downtime possible, I don't know, contractual issues or things, you're annoying customers because you're not getting things done. Also just looking at when you blow a hose, you lose a lot more oil than when you change it in a planned out manner. Not to mention you make a bit of a mess on the job site. If you've got oil everywhere, you then should be cleaning that up. And again, you've got oil all over your machine, which again should probably be cleaned up. If you actually factor in all of those costs, and put them all together, and consider that versus if you were to proactively identify that hose was about to break 2-3 weeks earlier, and actually plan it in at an opportune time to be changed, what is the cheapest option? I'd be pretty confident in saying that the proactive option is quite a bit cheaper overall than running to fail in that instance. So I suppose it's you'd be looking, if you were talking to your boss, you'd be looking for case studies and just trying to identify where what you're doing may not actually be the cheapest option. Sorry, I hope that answers it.
I hope so too. Well, you can go and have a cup of tea now, because that's pretty much where we're at with the questions. To everybody that participated throughout questions, throughout answers in the polls, thank you very much. We really appreciate how interactive that this is becoming. For next month, Adam will be back in front of the webcam. He'll be doing this year's, excuse me, now I'm getting it. He'll be back doing this year's NTI major accident incident reporting. And so look, if you found this interesting, relevant, please tell your colleagues, please tell your friends. We're really trying to open this up to all the industries that we're a part of. And thank you very much once again for coming along. Thank you, Hayden, for persevering. And thank you. We'll see you again next month.